studying for bio. Yeah, for the bio quiz. So I'm gonna just make a new one. So let's first start. I like to just jot down everything I can think of that is going to be on the test. You just kind of like, well, we'll just start with like everything I can remember, just like any words at all. So you just like go ahead and I guess you can pause the video and go and like write down everything you can think of, and then then you can unpause it and then see some of the things that I wrote down. Just I think we have the same slides, so it would be pretty much the same stuff, but you might need to adjust a little bit for the different lectures. So things that I came up with, you're gonna know, let's say, evolution. That's something. Was it common descent with modification? Hopefully you can read my handwriting. Let's see, what else? I remember natural selection. You could maybe talk about like all those different things. There was like sexual selection. There was, all the different kinds of natural selection with like the graph. I remember there's the graph thing. They all go in different ways. I remember there was, I don't even know, Hardy-Weinberg. You just kind of like whatever, you just kind of like word salad, word vomit it, and you just put everything out there. So there was Hardy-Weinberg. There was, let me see. You could, I guess this is also a good time to go back, look at the lecture slides. It talks about, hypothesis versus theory. It talks about cell theory. I believe we did touch on that. We talked about the different people. There was the people that came up with it. And I have like a couple like fun ways to like remember those people because they're just so hard. I have a really hard time remembering people. So people, there was a bunch of people like Darwin. There was Captain Hook. Hook. With his special spyglass, magnifying glass. And then his first mate, which was Lee Yuan Hawk. Lee seems like a good first mate name. And then Yuan. That seems like something that Hook could say to his first mate, Lee Yuan Hook. Because he's Hook. And his first mate that they got together, they were bad guys. And so they got put in a cell. Because they discovered the cell, the bad guy Hook. Was discovered, was it Look and Li Yuan Hook both discovered the cell, and they're pirates, and so instead of a spyglass, that thing that like pirates use, they used a microscope. Thing. This is supposed to be a microscope, but there's that. So that's some of the people. So you can keep on adding on to this. My next step that I like to do is I just start organizing it. How do these all connect? That way you can make sure you get everything else. So, new page. We're going to start. You can also like look at the slides for this. maybe we'll go down, let's say, evolution. Okay, what does that connect to? So you could like, draw out, okay, well, evolution, that has something to do. There's a process piece. How does this happen? What causes that to happen? Which is natural selection. That's an actual thing that comes from evolution. Now, there's also the effect. What is the thing that we're looking at? So I think of evolution as two parts. It's the thing that we just see. The thing that we see is common descent with modification. Which basically means that you have the same line of people just do, that box becomes that, becomes that, becomes that. That we just see the common descent, or just like everybody's coming, like everything, you're coming from the same ancestors, but you modify a little bit each time. So it becomes just a little bit different each time. And why does it become a little bit different each time? That's the process piece. So this is the what. This is the why. Or I think this is the effect, and this is the cause, or this is the process. This is the pattern that we see. We observe the pattern, we found out that's the process. Now, also tied with evolution is early theories. Spelled that so wrong. So there's a lot of early theories that come with evolution too. So where do those come from? Well, we used to think that, if a person goes to the jungle and they get their arm eaten off, then their kids would be born without an arm. Or if you were to work out and you would be really fit, you'd just give birth to like a beautiful, like six, just bulk, just like beautiful, like super ripped baby. I mean, that doesn't always happen. So just because you are just this big dude, I'm not very good at drawing. No big strong guy. You can imagine. That does not mean that your kids are going to be strong. That was Lamarck. Doesn't mean you're going to have a little baby. With like little baby muscles. And a little baby six-pack. That does not happen. You don't have baby six-packs. They have to do it themselves. And that was Lamarck that theorized that little changes like that are what gets it. That what makes it happen. What really happened was Darwin. Which is kind of like survivor's fallacy, I think of it. Survivor's fallacy is if you were to look at an airplane, and they looked at like all these different airplanes that came home from World War II, they saw them all and they saw that they all had bullet holes right about here. As they were studying these planes, they're like, and somebody said, well, we should put armor over those bullet holes right here to protect it, because that's where all of our planes all have bullet holes right there on the wings. And someone else was like, no, we should put armor everywhere but those bullet holes. Everywhere else. Because if those can take a bullet hole there, that leads them to be back here. So Darwin's kind of thinking the same thing. Okay, if you have a population of 100 dudes and only the fittest survive, then only the guys that have some people just have the right genetics to be strong, then they'll be able to pass that on to their kids. You see the difference? So think of that's just like survivor's fallacy, the idea of the airplanes and stuff. That makes sense to me. What I like to do is you always got to anchor it onto something that you know. So every time you draw this, draw something that you know as a circle and connect it to that. Or like Lamarck. How do you understand what Lamarck's theory was? You gotta connect it to that. That if you cut off a mouse tail, it's not going to have babies without a tail. And that's a little something that I use to remember Lamarck's idea. And so if you can connect it to something that you know, it's way faster to learn it. Now let's also go in, there's a bunch of different kinds of natural selection. There's the different graphs. I think that what makes it easier for me is that there's only so many ways that this graph can move. So if you think about it, it can move to the side. So it can go zoop. It can move to the other side. Or even if you were just break it up into parts. Let's say that, traits, you have extreme trait, middle, and then other extreme. So you have three different categories. You have the two extremes on either side. So this one, that could be the extreme one. And then here's the other one, the extreme. And then you have the middle. So, there's because there's only three possibilities, there's only three different categories, there's pretty much three different outcomes that could happen. Either one of these are good, and so naturally, because these guys are all the best, they have lots of babies, and these guys have no babies. Next time, you're going to have more of them over here. Because this one's better, the graph will move to be over there. Because they're having lots of babies. They had armor everywhere but right there, because that's where they didn't need it. And so they were able to make it back, and they were able to figure it out. And so You see, the way that I was able to tie concept, this concept of natural selection, to Darwin's idea of natural selection, to my way that I understand what natural selection is, that's like a good thing to help you like understand. If you were to think or like other ways to understand natural selection. Yeah, there's like, you say only like successful companies make money. If you think about it, all the different companies, if there's like 3 different companies, each one has, big bank take little bank, right? Actually, here, if you imagine big bank take little bank, you have your little, that's probably a good way to connect it. So Darwin said, big bank take little bank, which is why you only see big bank. When you're like going out, there's a lot of like, you see everywhere Walmart and like Amazon and all that, but you don't see as many mom and pop shops because they just don't work out as well. This guy has this guy is just and so why do you only see, why is like that the most common thing you see? Why do like all the companies that you see that you buy from would be really, big names, like huge corporations like, Walmart or something, is because, survival of the fittest. They're the ones that stick around. In the next generation, moving forward, you're going to see just big, all big. What Lamarck thought is that just because you are starting a business, just the very act of it just makes you be big. You just are big. You just get rich. Like when you start a company, that because you, just by the very nature of just owning a company, no matter what you do, you'll just get bigger because you just have been around for longer. That's just what has to happen. And that just always happens. What Darwin was like, nope, the biggest guy wins, The ones that make, the most money, that beat out their competitors, are going to win. And not everybody's going to win like Lamarck. So, if you think about this, these guys, big bank, you're going to get more of them later on. So we'll draw that graph a little bit better. So we have that. It can either go to one side or the other. Let's say this is better. It just moves in a single direction. So we call that directional. Just straight up. Now let's say, for example, there's something else that happens. What if instead of either of these two traits, being good, what happens if instead the middle one is good? Let's see. Oh, is it frozen? No. There it is. Oh, ooh, there we go. So let's see, we have one of these. Well, if the middle one's good, yeah. Well, then what's going to happen is you get stabilizing. So you'll get more going in there. If these guys are not delivering, they don't have any babies, no babies, they just don't have as many. And these guys are just like, you know, up there. They're just making it happen. Then you're going to see more of this, where there's a lot of people in the middle, and there's not as many in the outliers. Now, because it's like the opposite of directional, you could think of this as stabilizing. Because it's coming in for both sides, you have that squeeze. So we call it stabilizing. It's kind of like just putting it all in one, so pretty much everybody just kind of stays the same. Everyone will be the same after a while. Now, in this last example, what happens if we have this, we got this, what if both sides are good, but not the middle? Middle is bad. Well, what would happen? Well, if the middle is going to go down, if it's red, it goes down. If it's green, it's going to go up. That's, because there's two winners, it kind of like just throws everybody off. It disrupts the system. So we can call that disruptive. Let's see if I can find my right pen. What's going to happen, it's going to be like this. Middle's kind of down, and you get these two. You see how it's kind of both going the opposite of stabilizing. It's disruptive. It's disrupting the system. Because there's two winners. The system is disrupted. This one is, system stays the same. So that's pretty much all of those graphs. You have three options. Either option A, one of these wins, gets bigger, and it gets bigger. Option 2, both of them are good, and the system gets disrupted. Option 3, neither of them are good, and the middle one is good, and the system is stabilized. So that's stabilization. Now, other than natural selection, there are other ways that evolution can happen. For example, there is non-random mating. So, that makes sense, because who's going to have their DNA passed on to the next generation? The ones that make babies. And if it's not random, then that's another thing. You could be the most bestest, like perfect pinnacle of being fit, though that's not the only thing that's going to determine if you're going to have babies, if you're going to have like a progeny. There are other things that can factor into it. So within non-random mating, there's actually, I think of it just like as this big bubble. Everything, yeah, there's this whole bubble of non-random mating. And now within that bubble is a special kind that is actually another natural selection. And that is called sexual selection, where you just want to get with somebody who's fit. You get with someone who looks fit. What does that mean? They have even face, even good looking face, because that's just like our biological, just like, sheer biology. Even looking faces look healthy. Just looking, you look healthy. You're just most animal brain is like, yes, this is adaptive. So we'll color adaptive green. All of that's adaptive because you're specifically trying to make your future generation healthy and just fit. Because you're looking for traits that basically, because just non-office, usually unconsciously, this is when you're getting with somebody who will be healthy, can survive. Those are the things that are just, why would you get with the person who is like the biggest, because the biggest person's going to survive. Or like a bird will get with another bird that just looks like it's healthy because it's the one that's going to survive. Now, why else would you decide, why else might somebody decide to mate with them? Maybe they just, like blondes or something. Maybe they like curly hair. Or maybe they have money. Or maybe they're just, they share your love of tamales. I'm pretty sure I would marry somebody if they just like made an amazing tamale. No, I think I'm just kind of hungry. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe it's because they are in your hometown and you never left. Now, all these things don't necessarily mean you're going to survive longer. I mean, like, curly hair doesn't, like, make somebody, like, survive longer. Or, I mean, you can't, there's no, like, gene, there's no, like, genetic thing that's going to, like, make you have more money, theoretically. And, just, like, being in a hometown won't, like, make you have more money. But, those things are just everything that's just non-adaptive. So all this is non-adaptive random mating. So all this does not make it does cause evolution, but it's not making things more fit. So that's just the thing about evolution. is that it doesn't always make you more fit. No, it's not always making more fit. All it is, common descent with modification, that ties back to the central point, which is change in allele frequencies. Every time, it's just when your genes, your DNA is changed. Let's say like in a population of 100 people, and half of them have blue eyes and half have green eyes. If in the next 100 years, 1/4 of them have blue and 3/4 have green, that's a change. And so that is just textbook evolution. That's like when we decide, okay, that is evolution. And that does, even though it's changing, doesn't necessarily make you fit. Like, let's say peacocks, for example. Peacocks got those big feathers. What does that do for them? They're not going to, like, be able to get more prey with big feathers. That's not going to, like, help them, like, get, more food or survive better. So why do they keep on changing to have that? It's because the girls dig the peacock feathers. They like that. They're like, oh, yeah. All the girls are very attracted to a big old peacock with big peacock feathers. It doesn't necessarily make them more fit. There's other things that can make evolution can happen by things not being, there's other things that could make a population change other than it not being fit. For example, let's say if you were to just make your population really small, that's going to change it. That is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is when ever a population, just like a bunch of species, goes and gets really small. So how could a population all of a sudden go from being big to small? Well, one way is they just die. So bottleneck. That's basically just indiscriminately they die. For example, let's say you have bubonic plague or something. Bubonic plague hits. Let's say in your whole city, there are 5 people with red hair. Before the plague. After the plague, there's maybe like 2,000 people. Let's say like half of them die. Now there's 1,000. And you just so happened to have all those people with red hair just die. All of a sudden there's 0 people with red hair. Now, they're just, there's no more red hair. There's never going to be any more. Now, let's say if that didn't happen, maybe there was just one more person with red hair. And let's say they are just, they're busy and they have 20 kids. And their kids, each of them have 20 kids. shoot, now you have 400 people with red hair in situation 2. So this is kind of like the could have happened. That was like the little potential. Ooh, could have happened, but it didn't because they would have all died. This is what we call fixation. Fixation is when you have a bottleneck and generally genetic drift, and you lose just by random chance some important genes. And that can lead the whole population to totally change. Imagine this situation. You have 0 people with red hair, they evolve, and it's totally different. Maybe instead of red hair, what if they were let's say it's a population with, 0 people over 6 foot. Zero people that are more than 6 foot. Now, everybody here, every single person will just be, 5'11" or less. And it'll just keep on going that way. And they'll always be 5'11" or less. And that population is totally taking a different track. That whole city is just a bunch of like short people because they only had 5 people with, that are over 6 foot that later died and never kept on going. So that's how, that's one of the ideas of bottlenecking. Now, they don't have to all just die. They could just leave. What happens if just like, 1 or 2 dudes? What if in a population of, let's say, 100 people, they're all different, 5 people, let's say 5 dudes, 5 girls leave. And now let's say, for example, they are in a club and they just happen to all be, I don't know, most of them have webbed toes. They just, they leave. They all have webbed toes. What's going to happen to their kids? Well, their kids are going to have webbed toes. And they've left this population, so they're probably just going to keep on going, and they're in a whole different direction. And they just keep on doing that. And now how can this also be really bad? Something to consider. What happens if later on there was a disease that kills people specifically with webbed toes, or it specifically kills people that are, taller, shorter than 6 foot? Now those populations would be dying out. Compared to if they had even like, 1 or they had like some more people in there that didn't have webbed toes, they would be alive and they could keep on going. And so genetic drift is just when population goes from big to small, because bottleneck they die, which is depressing, which is why I think bottleneck, you know, bottle alcohol, depression. And there's also founder. Founder, it just leaves. You'd be like, did you found her? Did you find her? Nah, she left. She left me. Like, it's like, imagine like some guy is like, oh, I can't find my wife. Oh, have you found her? No, she left. And those are two ways that genetic drift can happen. Now, what else could make something not always be more fit? There's one more. So you have non-random mating, which a lot of it is red, except for this one little part right here. This part you do have adaptation, makes them more fit. There's also mutations. That doesn't always make you more fit. Like, I mean, you think about, like, you know, Down syndrome, amazing, you know, beautiful angels, though, especially if you were like, you know, imagine out in the wild, it might be a lot harder for them. You know, if they were just like, you know, thrown out into, you know, the cold world where there's like lions and tigers, that's not always going to help them, for example. Although sometimes it can. The thing about mutation is that's what leads to changes. So a lot of them are bad. Lots of like mutations are bad. But every now and then you get one mutation that makes it really good. Like, imagine if there was a weird mutation in fish. That suddenly makes them have, you know, like looking like feet looking things. Fish. Or where they could like leave the water. That could be a game changer. Imagine there's a random mutation for like spiders. I mean, insects. Where they had 2 extra legs. Oh, that could be a game changer. But a lot of the mutations are like, you have 1 extra leg. I mean, imagine like a little spider. I mean, a little like insect guy. You know, he has that just extra leg. It'd be like so imbalanced. Wouldn't really be helpful. You'd kind of be like, dang. This is hard. But if you have one that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh yeah. You know, stronger, faster, Spider-Man. He's like ready to go. He has Spidey sense activated. You know, that's, so some mutations, I think mutation is kind of like rolling the dice. 90% no fitness. A lot of times mutations don't help you, but it's that 10% that get passed on to future generations because they're more fit. So I can compare that to, think about houses back in the day. They were kind of like messing around. If you look at like oh man, like all those different vines from wire like vines from early like 2010s. So good. If you remember, like, especially like, I don't know, when we're like way younger, be like, oh yeah, let's watch Vines. Why are those ones from 2010 so good? Well, I'm pretty sure 90% of them were really bad, but 10% we still remember and we still talk about, and that's why they're like so good. Or like music. Everyone talks about, like, oh dang, music would like, used to be like so good back in the day. Well, it's because there was like lots of different music. A lot of it was probably just not that super good, but 10% of it was good, and that 10% is all we ever listen to, all we ever talk about. So same with mutations. 90% of them are bad, but that 10% is all you need to later become the big guy and do better. So let's see. Covered a lot of ground here. I don't think we've gotten into yet the people, early theories. Lamarck. So Lamarck did that. Other than that, there is Captain Hook and his sidekick. So the actual thing, so I use Captain Hook as like a metaphor. The actual guy's name was Hook. Hook found the cell. That's what we figured out. He looked at the cell. Also, there's another guy. Lee Yu Wan Hawk. Lee Yu Wan Hawk made a better microscope and looked at the cells in detail. So how do I remember? Okay, Hook, cell. I think, okay, imagine Peter Pan is fighting Captain Hook. And he puts Captain Hook in a cell. Okay, Hook, cell. Now, Hook is a pirate, and so pirates have those little, like, things. You know what I'm talking about? That thing. But he has a special one called a microscope. So he made the microscope because he used a microscope to look at his cell. Except his first mate, Lee Yu Wan Hook, he found him in the cell using the microscope because he was looking for his captain. So Lee, using his very good microscope, found Hook in the cell, and he ran to him. Lee Yu Wan Hook. So Lee Yu Wan Hook. It's kind of silly, That's how I like to remember it. I like to make a little story. There was another guy, Pasture. So I like to imagine this story. Once upon a time, there was an ambitious boy. He thought that the world was just so amazing. There was this ambitious man who was like, yeah, I think that good things are just going to happen to me. And he really needed to have some cows. So what did he buy? He bought a pasture. Now this is reference to the dude whose name was Pasteur, who discovered that cells don't randomly happen. You know, he had the two things. He had this thing in the flask, boiled it, nothing, because it was sealed. He tried this, it was open, boiled it, and he found cells came. There were cells in that thing. What the heck? How are there like tiny cells in it? Where do those come from? Because we boiled it. We boiled it. You could say we pasteurized it. That's where we get pasteurized. That is actually the name of pasteurized. So what he did is he took this flask of broth, boiled it. That's a fire. It's supposed to be a fire. Just think fire thoughts there. That's a much better fire. Boiled it, and nothing. In that, because I mean it is sealed off. This, air is going in and out. And there were cells up in there. They had living cells there. Where did those come from? And he said they came from the air. They were just up in the air. Now, how could he prove that those cells didn't just magically show up in this magical broth? I don't know, it was like a thing that would help cells live. You know, if you're leaving like a soup out overnight, it's going to grow mold. Did the mold just magically come there? So what he did is he took a little thing and he had this, it's like a little pipe almost, I don't even know. He had that, so air could get in. So it should, just like this one, be able to. But if that air was bringing cells, they would get trapped right here. And so you should see nothing here. And they found out, he did the same thing, boiled it, and there was nothing. Cells don't randomly happen. Cells do not, and now this is a key word here, spontaneously generate. Cells do not randomly, spontaneously generate. So, back to our story with the man who needed cows. He thought if he just bought a pasture, he would get a cow. But it didn't happen. Because cows don't randomly spawn. There's no spontaneous generation. Fake. no such thing as spontaneous generation. Cells and cows do not appear. Cows do not appear in pastures, even though they're perfectly placed, good place for a cow. A cow won't magically spawn in a pasture. It just is what it is. And Captain Hook was found with a microscope in a cell, because Hook, cell. And Li Yuan Hook. Li ran to Hook. So Li Yuan Hook. But he couldn't pronounce his R's right, so that's why Wan. Li Yuan Hook. He was even better. He had a cooler microscope, and he found Hook in the cell because he found cooler cells. Those are all early theories of that. Another one, before Lamarck even, there was Aristotle. Aristotle organized everything into a great old big ladder. They thought that they just went up the ladder or something. You have like a bush. You have like a little maybe single cell. Maybe up here you have a bush. And maybe you have like a little mouse. And maybe here you have like a dog. And then here you have a person. But, I mean, how are you going to put that into, what's your basing this off of? I mean, if you're talking about, ethics, I don't know. But, size, I mean, a big old whale is bigger than any one of those. And, I mean, elephants certainly live for a long time. If you're going to do, a little... Ooh. Maybe this is a horse now. There's a little tusk. Big ear. Big ear. Oh, this kind of looks like it. I don't know what that's supposed to be. That's a scary elephant. But where is it? Where do you put those? They don't fit into a ladder. I mean, who's on top of who? That just doesn't really make any sense. And he thought that people were just like that. And he also thought that each thing does not change. He really liked the different types. That each species never changes. He had typological. What was logical for him was the types. The species. That dog will always be dog, has always been dog, and will never be anything more than dog. Lamarck was like, well, actually, you see, wolf became dog, and dog became poodle or chihuahua. Because what the heck is a chihuahua? I don't know. Those are kind of similar. Those are pretty different. I'm pretty sure there is definitely change. What's the most doggy dog? What's the most humany human? That's typological. Aristotle, this dude, was all about the types. I think the last thing, we get into Hardy Weinberg. So, when does evolution not happen? What if it does not happen? How could we show that evolution isn't happening? Well, let's look at a Punnett square real quick. Let's say this. How do we know? So we know that this is how alleles get handed down. We got those Punnett squares. Remember those? We got that. we got that. We have, you know, with the pea plant, you have yellow, like that recessive, you have 1. And now let's count these. You have this, big, big. Well, if you were to look at how each of these alleles, how frequently they show up in this is what you would expect the relationship to be. Let's say you have 1, 2, 3 alleles. You would have 1, 2. Let's say you have that. Now notice, every time you do the Punnett square, no matter what you do, let's say, oh, whoops, just straight up, so that's that. Let's say those are yellow. Let's say these guys are green. Now go ahead and you could do some Punnett squares mixed around. What you'll notice is that in this, you have 3 black. So you have 1 of these guys, the lowercase, for every 3 of these guys. So you count it out, 1, 2, 3. Green, you have 1, 2, 3. This one's you have 1, 2, 3. In this generation, because these 2 got with these 2, these are the populations, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 6. Now, the other aberrations, you have 1, 2, you have 2. So, that simplifies to 3, 1. So whenever you're looking at the frequencies, that's where we get P plus Q equals 1. P would be like this. Q is equal to this. And that's just like the frequency. Like that's, always so, 75%. So these are like 75%. This one is 25%. And that holds true. So that's how you get that. Because all you're doing is you're just keeping that consistent. Now, what evolution is when you have a change in your genes. We use this to determine the genes. So if it's changing, then there's something up. But if it's just like, straight mathematically like this, like you would predict, and your genes haven't changed, it's still 3-to-1 ratio overall. Evolution isn't happening. You still have the same number of genes, you just doubled them. Now, how do you get the other equation? Well, you multiply one by another. So you would have p squared plus 2pq plus q squared. And that's how you determine heterozygote and homozygote. If you were to something that helped me to understand that better is if you were to make a big Punnett square, the big 4x4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say you're tracking blue eyes and then yellow hair. You'll find that they kind of follow this pattern. People that are homozygous for either trait will be, about like, a little less. So that's squared. So let's say in this one, that actually might be more confusing. I think that let's just know that allele frequency is just however many times you see, because everybody has like 2 alleles. So P plus Q equals 1. That just means if you're looking at like, everybody has to have 2. So however often one of those alleles is dominant and the other one's recessive. If you have, however often you have an either dominant or recessive gene, 50% of the time, one of the genes from the pool is dominant, 50%, it's going to add up to 100. Or, you'd be 0.5, 1. The other one, let's say you were to do P squared. Well, that would just be how often something's homozygous for dominant. So that would be 0.5 times 0.5, you get 0.25. This one you get 0.25. This one you would get 0.5. Could you just do 2 times 0.5 times 0.5? Those add up to 0.25. Multiply by that 2, that's 0.5. I like to think algebra, you just like look for frequencies. If it asks for is it the frequency of one allele, use this equation. If it asks for number in a population, you're going to take this equation, but then you're going to multiply it by however many people are in the total population. If you have 100 people and you want to know how many of them have blue eyes, it's not going to make sense for you to say, oh, there's a third of a person has blue eyes. That doesn't really make sense. But if you were to multiply that 3 times 100 and you were to say 33 people have blue eyes. Okay, yeah, 30 people have blue eyes. That sounds right. That's cool. If you were to just say, how often, or I think keyword here is frequency. How frequent is homozygous? Well, then you could use this because, it happens 0.5, part of the time, which is 0.5 is equal to 50%. So yeah, it happens about 50% of the time. I think converting these to percentages when you're checking your answer is helpful. Because if there's a number in the population and you said 30%, that's not a number, that's just a percentage. But if this says frequency or percentage, this is 30%, that's helpful. Yeah, so just doing some practice problems for that. I would say go through, tie each of these to your own knowledge. Like, dang, wow, what does this relate to this? How does that relate to that? You know, coming up with your own metaphors. Great way to keep it going. Let me know if you have any questions. But yeah, I hope that this was helpful.